Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us end up hurting us the most. I was born in 1951 in Millerville, a small town in Alabama, right in the heart of cotton country. The sun blazed relentlessly, and life was never easy. My mama was Betty Sue, small in stature, but big in heart, with tired brown eyes and hands calloused from years of hard work. She'd hum old songs her mama taught her as she went about her chores, soft melodies that filled our little house. My daddy was Robert, tall and broad-shouldered, loading and unloading cotton bales and grain sacks at the town market. To outsiders, he was hard-working, steady, and serious, respected by everyone in the neighborhood. Our house was a tiny wooden structure with a tin roof, just 3 rooms total. The front room that doubled as my parents' bedroom, a small bedroom where my 2 brothers and I slept, Wesley, 3 years older than me, and Alan, 2 years younger, and a kitchen out back with a wood-burning stove and a wobbly wooden table Daddy had built himself. The floors were rough pine planks, but Mama kept them swept clean, always busy tending to the house and the 3 of us kids. I still remember our daily routine clearly. We'd wake up at the crow of the neighbor's rooster before dawn, and Mama would already be in the kitchen cooking breakfast. When the hens were laying, it was usually grits with eggs, if not, cornmeal porridge sweetened with molasses and milk. The smell of brewing coffee filled the whole house. After breakfast, we'd walk 20 minutes down a dirt road to school. I loved that walk more than anything. At school, I felt free to play with the other kids, to laugh out loud, to run on the dusty playground during recess. Miss Johnson was wonderful to me, always praising my neat handwriting and hard work. She was an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun, and she treated all of us like her own children. The games we played were simple but joyful. Hide and seek between the neighborhood houses, ring around the rosy at school, and jump rope with ropes we girls braided from old rags. I had a cornshuck doll Mama made for me, with yellow yarn hair and a dress sewn from scrap fabric, my most precious possession, which I cuddled every night as I slept. But my heart would clench tight when school let out in the afternoon, because we never knew what mood Daddy would be in when he came home from work. Sometimes he'd return calm, sit in the rocking chair on the porch, ask Mama to bring him his dinner, and just sit quietly listening to country music on the old radio. Those were the peaceful times. But more often than not, we'd hear his footsteps on the street and know a storm was coming. He'd storm in with a dark scowl, shouting and complaining about everything: his boss, the heat, cold food, us being too loud. Anything could set him off. A misplaced plate, my doll left in the front room, Wesley leaving his shoes by the door, Alan crying like any small child would, all of it angered him. Mama lived in constant fear, trying to read his mood, keeping everything perfect, telling us to be quiet. "Celia, baby, go play out back," she'd whisper when she saw him coming home in a foul temper. "Take your brothers and don't make a sound, you hear?" Then the 3 of us would run to the backyard, trying to hide as if we didn't exist. When I was 6 years old, I realized Daddy had 2 faces. The Robert the neighborhood knew waved at everyone on the street, helped anyone carry heavy loads, and chatted about work and football at Joe's general store. But the Robert we knew at home flew into a rage over the smallest things, saying children had to learn discipline, that no one had dared act up like that when he was a kid. He called it teaching respect. "You'll learn to respect authority," he'd say whenever we made the slightest childhood mistake, and if anyone dared to question him, it was terrible. Mama had long since learned not to interfere, just standing far away with sad eyes and trembling hands, whispering, "God help us, God help us." What hurt me most, my darlings, was seeing the fear in my brother's eyes. Wesley, even though he was older, would shrink into corners at the sound of Daddy shouting. And little Alan, poor thing, learned by the age of 4 not to cry too loud if he fell or hurt himself, because if he did, there'd be real trouble. That's how I grew up, children, tiptoeing around my own home, speaking in whispers, never putting anything out of place, never daring to be a child. Because in our house, being a child was dangerous. Everything changed forever on a day in January 1957. I'd just turned 6 the month before. Still a little girl who believed the world was safe and parents were there to protect their children. But I was so wrong. I remember Mama, Betty Sue, had gone next door to Mrs. Patterson's house to give her some eggs from our laying hen. That's what the women in the neighborhood did. Traded things back and forth, eggs today, flour tomorrow, helping each other get by when times were tight. She'd asked me to watch my brothers. Wesley was playing pretend cars with sticks in the yard, and little Alan was napping in the front room. I was in the kitchen, trying to reach a glass jar on the high shelf to get a drink of water. It was an ordinary jar, the kind Mama sometimes brought home from the market filled with jam. I climbed up on a chair, stretched as far as my little arms would go, but the jar slipped from my hands. The sound of glass shattering on the wooden floor echoed through the house like thunder. Alan woke up screaming and crying, and at that exact moment, I heard Daddy's heavy footsteps coming down the street. My heart was pounding, my darlings, as I scrambled with my small hands to pick up the shards, so frantic that I cut my fingers. Blood dripped onto the floor, mixing with the tears that I couldn't hold back any longer. What was that? Robert's voice roared through the house like a wild animal. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face red from the sun and rage, his dark eyes fixed on me. When he saw the broken glass and the blood on my fingers, there was no concern, only pure anger. You naughty girl. Haven't I told you children not to touch things that don't belong to you? He walked slowly toward me, circling like a predator closing in on its prey. Look at this mess. Your mama's gonna have to clean this up because of you. I trembled as I tried to explain. Daddy, I just wanted a drink of water. I couldn't reach the jars on the lower shelf. But he didn't want to listen, he never did. A drink of water? He laughed, but there was no joy in it, only malice. Since when do children give orders in this house? You should have waited for your mama. But no, little miss thinks she's grown up, huh? That's when it happened. Children, the first time in my life I felt Daddy's heavy hand strike my face. The blow was so hard it knocked me to the floor, right onto the broken glass. The physical pain was excruciating, but the pain in my heart was worse. Because until that day, no matter how angry he got, he'd never laid a hand on any of us 3. Now do you understand what happens when you misbehave? He looked down at me as I lay on the floor with blood from my knees, mixing with the glass shards. Or do I need to teach you a real lesson about obedience? Just then, Mama ran back home. She'd heard Alan crying from down the street and rushed to see what was wrong. When she saw me lying there bleeding and looked into Robert's face, she knew immediately what had happened. Oh my God, Robert, what did you do? The child is hurt. She ran to pick me up, dabbing at my wounds with the hem of her dress. Your daughter deliberately broke that jar to defy me, he lied shamelessly. She climbed on the chair even though she knew better, making this mess. She needs to learn our house has rules. Mama looked into my eyes, and I knew she understood I hadn't done it on purpose. But I also saw fear in her eyes, fear of her own husband. She only said softly, Robert, Celia wasn't being naughty. She's a good girl. A good girl. He shouted even louder. Good girls don't break things in the house. Good girls obey. If you can't raise this child right, I'll do it my way. That day marked the beginning of my nightmares. Everything I did, or everything he thought I did, became an excuse for his discipline. Laughing too loud with my brothers earned me a scolding. Crying when I got hurt made me weak. Putting something in the wrong place got me taught a lesson. And with each lesson, the violence escalated. First slaps, then shoves, then punches and kicks. He always said the same thing. This is for your own good, girl. When you learn to behave, this won't be necessary. As if it was my fault. As if a 6-year-old child could fully control her actions to never anger an unstable grown man. Mama did her best to protect me, constantly whispering warnings to be careful, not to give him any reason. Celia, baby, don't touch anything when Daddy's home. Stay quiet, play in your room, don't make a sound. But how can a child not be a child? My brothers changed too. Wesley, once bright and lively, became quiet and vigilant. Little Alan learned to cry softly, covering his mouth with his small hand when he got hurt. Our house became a prison, and the three of us were prisoners of Daddy's unpredictable temper. At school, I changed too. Miss Johnson noticed I'd grown quieter and more withdrawn. Celia, baby, you don't seem happy lately. Is something wrong? She asked kindly. But how could I tell her? After every lesson, Daddy would threaten me. If you dare tell anyone what goes on in this house, next time it'll be much worse. So bad you'll wish you'd never been born. I believed him. I was just a 6-year-old child, convinced that terrible things would happen if I told the truth. So I lied to everyone. No, Miss Johnson, I'm fine. Just a little tired. She looked worried, but didn't press me. At home, I learned to tiptoe, speak in whispers, not touch anything, and try to make myself invisible. But no matter how hard I tried to be perfect, something always happened, some excuse for him to discipline me again. Days turned into months, and I grew more and more confused. Why was the man who was supposed to love and protect me the one who hurt me the most in the world? The years that followed were like walking through a minefield, my darlings. From age 6 to 10, I learned that a child can endure almost anything, but the cost of that endurance is too high. Daddy Robert turned our home into a place where fear lurked around every corner, and silence was our only protection. Violence grew like a toxic weed, from a single slap to daily teaching moments. Waking up each morning felt like a gamble. Would I go unnoticed today? Would my brothers avoid angering him? But it was impossible, children. How can 3 young children not be noisy, not play, not exist? I learned to read all the signs. The way he slammed the door when he came home from work. The sound of his footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, meant a moment of peace. Heavy and hurried, meant a storm was coming. The tone of his voice when he spoke to Mama. Sharp and gruff the moment he walked in meant Wesley, Alan, and I should hide immediately. His lessons became more creative and more cruel. If I dropped food on the floor, he didn't just slap me, he made me pick it up and eat it, saying, "That's how dogs eat." If I forgot to put my cornshuck doll in the exact spot he designated, he'd throw it into the wood stove and make me watch it burn, saying, "Sloppy children don't deserve toys." My mama, Betty Sue, suffered right along with me. Sometimes she'd try to intervene, but it only made things worse. "Betty Sue, you've spoiled this girl. If you can't discipline her, I will. I know how to teach respect." Then his anger would turn on her. How many times did I see Mama with black eyes, telling neighbors she'd walked into a door? How many times did I find her crying silently in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she prepared supper? The worst part was the constant humiliation. He wasn't satisfied with just hitting me. He wanted to destroy me emotionally too. Look at you, ugly and stupid. Who'd ever want you when you grow up? Mrs. Patterson's daughter is your age and does everything right. You're nothing but a burden to this family. If it weren't for my duty, I'd throw you out on the street today. Those words hurt more than any fist, my darlings. Physical wounds heal, but those words stay with a child forever, etched into their soul. I began to believe I really was ugly and stupid, that I was a burden, that I deserved all the terrible things happening to me. At school, I became a shadow. Miss Johnson tried to cheer me up, asking why I always kept my head down, why I no longer played with the other children at recess. But how could I explain? At home, I'd learned that I didn't deserve to play, didn't deserve to smile, didn't deserve anything but pain. I made up countless excuses for the bruises that kept appearing on my body, fell out of bed, walked into a door, tripped over a rock. Miss Johnson always looked at me with worried eyes, but back then, people didn't interfere in other families' business the way they do now. A parent spanking their child was considered normal, even necessary. My brothers changed too. Wesley, 3 years older than me, took on the role of protecting us. When he heard Daddy's angry voice, he'd run into the room and signal for Alan and me to hide under the bed. We'd huddle there, clinging to each other, listening to the shouting and arguing outside, praying silently for the storm to pass. Poor little Alan, who was only 4, developed strange habits. He started wetting the bed every night, which gave Daddy yet another excuse to teach him a lesson. A 4-year-old boy wetting the bed like a baby? I'll teach you to control yourself. Then came another beating, leaving Alan sobbing uncontrollably. Food became a weapon too. If any of us didn't finish everything on our plates, even if we felt sick, he'd force us to eat it. Food is sacred. I work myself to the bone to feed this family, and you will eat every last bite. Once Alan was sick with a cold and couldn't keep his food down, vomiting on his plate. Daddy made him eat the vomit, saying, "Now you'll learn not to waste food." I started having terrible nightmares, my darlings. Dreams where I was running endlessly through fields, never reaching safety. Dreams where I could fly away from that house, with wings like a bird, to a place where no one could hurt me. During the day, I lived in a world of make-believe, pretending I had another home, filled with flowers where everyone laughed and played together, pretending I was Miss Johnson's daughter, feeling her kindness every day at school. It was the only way I could bear the reality. The violence got worse and worse, and I was always covered in bruises. Purple arms, scratch marks on my back, belt welts on my legs, all hidden carefully under my clothes. Mama taught me to lie more cleverly, of course. If anyone asks, say you fell out of the tree in the yard. If they press, say you slipped in the mud after the rain. That's how I grew up, children. Learning that children are worthless, that they don't deserve love, that their only purpose is to obey and be punished. By the time I was 10 years old, I felt like an old woman inside, tired of living, convinced nothing would ever change. But the worst was yet to come, because I was slowly becoming a child who no longer feared death. That's a dangerous place to be, very dangerous. Because when you don't fear death anymore, you might do something that changes everything. It was an afternoon in March 1961, my darlings, one of those suffocatingly hot Alabama afternoons where the sun feels like it's melting the earth and the air is thick as lead. I'd just turned 10 the month before, but I felt like I'd endured 100 years of suffering. That kind of pain is only understandable to those who've lived through it. When a child experiences too much suffering, they become numb. No fear, no hope, no will to live. I was like a rag doll, beaten repeatedly but never breaking, because there was nothing left inside to shatter. That fateful afternoon, Mama Betty Sue had left early in the morning to deliver laundry to her employer, Mrs. Whitman. Mrs. Whitman lived in the nicer part of Millerville, in a big house with a yard full of flowers. Mama went there 3 times a week to do odd jobs for extra money, because Daddy's paycheck never lasted until the end of the month. We always struggled, always went without. "Celia, baby," she said before leaving, looking at me with her tired eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Watch your brothers and fix your daddy's lunch. Put the beans on the stove at 11:40. Stir them occasionally, and don't forget to add the chopped onions I left in the bowl for flavor. I'll be back before he gets home." But things didn't go as planned that day, my darlings. Mrs. Whitman had asked Mama to wash extra clothes and do some additional work, and Mama lost track of time. Meanwhile, I, a 10-year-old child, was playing the role of mother, taking care of 2 younger brothers and cooking for the whole family. I did exactly what Mama had told me: put the beans on the stove, adjusted the wood fire just right, and let them simmer slowly. Wesley was in the yard playing pretend boats with wooden blocks in an imaginary river, and I watched him through the kitchen window while stirring the beans to keep them from burning. Just then, I heard whimpering from the bedroom. It was Alan. He was 7 years old by then, but still small and thin, always getting hurt. I ran to check on him and found the poor little boy lying on the floor beside the bed. He'd tried to reach a small toy on top of an old trunk and fallen, hitting his right knee on the wooden corner. "Ow, ow, it hurts so bad, Celia, it hurts," he cried, clutching his knee, tears streaming down his thin face as the knee swelled up purple. My heart ached for my little brother as I lifted him into my arms, even though he was getting heavy, and carried him to the kitchen, where I soaked a towel in cold water and pressed it to his wound. "Calm down, little brother. Mama will be home soon with her home remedy," I whispered, stroking his hair. "You're brave, aren't you? Little men don't cry for long." I sat with him for about 15 minutes, humming the lullabies Mama used to sing to us when we were babies. Alan gradually calmed down, stopped crying, and rested his head on my shoulder. It was a peaceful moment, my darlings, rare and precious, in our house of suffering. But that's when my life fell apart completely. When I went back to the kitchen to stir the beans, I smelled something terrible. The smell of burning, the smell of disaster. I ran to the stove and froze in horror. The beans had burned to the bottom of the heavy iron pot, one of our few valuable possessions. The water had evaporated completely, leaving nothing but black and charred beans, and smoke was rising toward the ceiling. My heart stopped beating, truly stopped. As I stared at that smoking pot, I knew with the instinctive certainty of a traumatized child that my life would never be the same again that afternoon. Because Daddy always came home for lunch exactly on time, as regular as a clock. If he came home and found no lunch waiting for him, my small fingers began to tremble violently. I tried desperately to fix it, adding water, scraping at the burnt beans stuck to the bottom, hoping to salvage at least some of them, but the more I stirred, the worse it got. The smell of burnt beans filled the house, clinging to the walls, the low ceiling, every corner. Oh God, what am I going to do?" I whispered to myself, tears pouring down my face. "Daddy's going to kill me. He really is going to kill me this time." I wasn't exaggerating. In the past few months, his violence had escalated to new heights. I was always bruised, always afraid that one day he'd go too far. Just then, I heard that sound, the familiar, terrifying sound of his heavy footsteps approaching our house on the dirt road, kicking up dust. It was noon, and Daddy was home from the market, hungry and expecting lunch on the table. I was terrified beyond words as I ran to the bedroom, grabbed Wesley and Alan, who was still limping from his hurt knee, and whisperedly, "Hide under the bed right now and don't come out. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens to me, stay quiet, quiet as mice." They looked at me with wide eyes filled with pure fear, and they understood. Poor children, they'd learned long ago that when I spoke in that panicked tone, a storm was coming. I watched as they crawled under that old bed, huddling together like scared birds, trembling with fear. My heart shattered into a million pieces at the sight of them, but I had no time to comfort anyone. The footsteps were getting closer, more terrifying by the second. I ran back to the kitchen and stood in the smoke, waiting for the inevitable. At that moment, my darlings, something strange happened to me. Instead of feeling the usual fear, I felt a cold calm, as if my soul was already preparing to leave this world. At 10 years old, I no longer feared death. That's a terrible thing, children. When a child reaches that point, it means their spirit has already died. "Where's my lunch?" His roar echoed through the house like thunder in a drought. No greeting, no concern, not even a "how are you?" Only pure anger, demands, and violence waiting to erupt. When he walked into the kitchen and saw the scene before him, the burnt pot, the smoke, the terrible smell filling the air, his face twisted into a look of hatred that chilled me to the bone. His eyes were red as embers, his fists clenched tight, and I knew I wasn't going to survive this. "You idiot, worthless piece of trash," he shouted so loud the walls seemed to shake. "Can't even watch a pot? Where's your mama? How dare she leave a stupid girl like you in charge of my food?" I trembled as I tried to explain. "Daddy, Alan fell and got hurt. I had to take care of him. It was an accident." But he wasn't listening. In his mind, I deserved to pay a terrible price for ruining his sacred lunch. "Ruined my food? Then you won't eat for a week. Maybe that'll teach you to appreciate what you have." And then the violence began. The first blow sent me crashing into the wall, followed by another and another, each one harder than the last. But this time was different, my darlings. This time I didn't cry, didn't beg for mercy, didn't try to run. I just stood there looking into his eyes, my calm gaze only enraging him further, because he fed off his victim's fear, and I was no longer going to give him that satisfaction. "Not crying? Think you're brave? I'll show you who's in charge of this house." He grabbed my arm roughly and dragged me across the kitchen floor like a sack of potatoes, squeezing so hard I thought my bones would break. That's when he picked up the burnt iron pot, still hot from the fire, and raised it above his head like a weapon. "Want me to cook you like those beans, you worthless piece of garbage?" At that moment, my darlings, something inside me snapped. What I felt wasn't fear, it was cold anger, absolute clarity. If I didn't do something, he really was going to kill me that day. And strangely enough, I had almost accepted that fate. With courage I didn't know I possessed, I looked him straight in the eyes and said in a voice that didn't sound like my own, "Do whatever you want to me. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I'm not afraid of anything." The effect was immediate and terrifying. He flew into a wild, animalistic rage. He threw the pot to the floor with all his strength, a crash that must have startled the entire neighborhood, then lunged at me with a violence I'd never seen before. "You little monster, devil, I'll teach you to respect me. I'll teach you to never talk back to me again." He grabbed me by the hair with one hand, lifting me off the floor like an animal, and pressed my head down with the other. I'll never forget the sound of my head hitting the corner of the brick wall. It was like a giant bell ringing inside my skull, a shrill metallic noise that echoed through every part of my soul. The last thing I heard was my brother's desperate screams. They'd crawled out from under the bed and seen everything. "Celia, Celia," they shouted, but their voices sounded as if they were coming from a million miles away. After that, my darlings, there was only darkness, an endless, bottomless darkness darker than the blackest night. No pain, no fear, only silence. For 6 long months, my soul floated in that darkness, while my small body fought for its life in a hospital bed. While I lay unconscious and defenseless, clinging to life, my father put on the performance of his life, a grieving, desperate father whose beloved little girl had suffered a terrible household accident. When I opened my eyes for the first time after those 6 months of darkness, my darlings, it felt like being born again. But not a joyful, beautiful rebirth, more like returning from a very far, very cold place that I'd almost never left. The first thing I saw was the white ceiling of Birmingham Hospital, stained with watermarks that looked like gray clouds. The first thing I felt was the worst headache a human being can imagine, as if 1,000 hammers were pounding inside my skull at once. "She's awake. She's awake. Doctor, hurry." It was Mama Betty Sue's voice, right beside me, holding my hand. When I slowly turned my head, I barely recognized her. She'd lost about 40 pounds, her hair had turned completely white, once brown, and her eyes were red and swollen from endless crying. She looked like an 80-year-old woman, not 40. "My baby, my precious little girl," she whispered, kissing my forehead as her tears fell on my face. "You're back with Mama. You're home." I tried to speak, but only a strange hoarse sound came out. My throat was dry as sandpaper. My tongue felt like paper. The doctor was a tall, thin man named Dr. Harrison, and he and the nurses rushed over immediately. They examined me, shining a small flashlight in my eyes, asking me to squeeze their hands, to wiggle my toes. "It's a miracle," the doctor said, shaking his head as he spoke to Mama. "With such severe head trauma, honestly, we didn't expect her to pull through. But she needs plenty of rest and careful care. Her brain is still healing." Over the next few days, I drifted in and out of consciousness, gradually remembering what had happened. Memories came back like pieces of a terrible puzzle. The burnt beans, Daddy's rage, the terrible sound of my head hitting the wall. And with those memories came an emotion I'd never felt before, a cold, calculated anger mixed with courage. I didn't know where this strength came from. Mama stayed by my hospital bed day and night, sleeping on an uncomfortable chair beside me. During the long afternoons, when I was too weak to get out of bed, she told me what had happened over those 6 months. How Daddy, the hypocrite, had played the part of the grieving father perfectly. How he'd come to the hospital every day, cried in front of the doctors, and accepted condolences from neighbors and acquaintances. Poor Robert, people would say, working so hard to support his family, and now this tragedy with his daughter. Being a father is so difficult. If only they knew he was the one who'd caused all this suffering. The worst part was that he'd visited me too, standing beside my unconscious body, holding my hand and whispering, "Daddy's little girl, you have to wake up. Daddy misses you." Of course, it was all an act for the doctors and nurses, all pretense, all lies. But my brothers couldn't hide their fear anymore. Every time he approached, they'd shrink back, trembling, hiding behind Mama. Poor little Alan had developed a stutter, and still wet the bed every night. Wesley barely spoke at all, only answering when directly addressed. After 2.5 months in the hospital, the doctors said I'd recovered enough to go home, and Mama called Grandpa. "Theodore, Celia's coming home next week. Then I'll send the invitations," he replied. "Next Sunday at noon, at my farm, I'm having a welcome home dinner for my granddaughter, and the whole family is required to be there. Tell Robert it's not an invitation, it's an order." Anyone who doesn't come is no longer part of this family. During my last week in the hospital, my darlings, a strange feeling began to grow inside me. It wasn't fear or despair anymore. It was hope mixed with a longing for justice. At 10.5 years old, after fighting for my life for 6 months, I was finally going to have the chance to tell the truth in front of my entire family. On the Saturday before I was discharged, Daddy came to see me for the last time. He stood beside my bed, putting on his usual act for the nurses about how happy he was that I was coming home. But when we were alone for a few minutes, he leaned down close to my ear and whispered in that cold, familiar voice, "I hope these months have taught you to behave. Because nothing's changed at home. The rules are still the same. Either you obey or you suffer the consequences." I looked him straight in the eyes and replied with a calm determination that surprised even me. "Things are going to be different now, Daddy. Very different." He laughed cruelly. "Different? How? You think because you were sick, I'll feel sorry for you? Spoiled children never learn." "At Grandpa's dinner tomorrow," I said, still holding his gaze, "I'm going to tell everyone what really happened that afternoon. I'm going to tell them it wasn't an accident." His face turned pale as a sheet. "You little brat, if you dare tell anyone, what will you do?" I asked, finding courage I didn't know I had. "Hit me again in front of Grandpa Theodore, Uncle Walter, Uncle Isaac, and the whole family? I'd like to see you try." For the first time in my life, I saw fear in Daddy's eyes, real fear. Because he knew that the next day, at the farm, he'd have to answer for years of cowardice and violence. And I knew I was ready to tell the truth, no matter what the cost. Now here I am, my darlings, 74 years old, sitting in the kitchen of my home in Cedar Falls, Alabama, baking cookies for my grandchildren who'll be home from school soon. As I look at my wrinkled hands kneading the dough, I think about everything they've been through, the pain this heart has endured, and the obstacles it's overcome. It's hard to believe that the woman surrounded by love and peace today is the same little girl who almost died at the hands of her own father at 10 years old. After that unforgettable Sunday at Grandpa Theodore's farm, the day that changed my life forever, my story took a completely different turn. My brothers Wesley and Alan, Mama Betty Sue, and I moved to Grandpa and Grandma's small farm. As for Daddy, he spent some time in a hospital in Birmingham recovering, and after that, he was never allowed near us again. The entire family banded together to make sure of it. It was on Grandpa Theodore's farm that I learned what a real family is, children. I learned that children can laugh loud, run free, be mischievous, even break things without being beaten. I learned that when we get hurt, we receive comfort, not scolding. I learned that parents are supposed to protect their children, not hurt them. Grandpa didn't say much, but he was full of love. Every morning, he'd call me to come help him milk the cows. "Come on, little granddaughter," he'd say in his gruff but kind voice. "Let's learn how to take care of the animals." I'd run to join him, and even though I was small, I learned to care for another living being, and that's a beautiful thing. Grandma Dorothy, not a neighbor, that's her name, was an amazing baker. Her sweets were the most delicious in the world: creamy fudge, melt-in-your-mouth white coconut candy, perfectly crisp peanut brittle. She'd always ask for my help. "Celia, my dear granddaughter, come stir the peach jam. Slow and gentle now, sweets can't be rushed." It was she who taught me to cook with love and patience. All the cooking skills I have today, I learned in that big farm kitchen, with its wood-burning stove that warmed the whole house and filled the air with the smell of cinnamon and cloves. I grew up on that farm until I was 15 years old. My darlings, I went to the small school in town and made real friends for the first time in my life. Even though I was almost a teenager, I finally learned to be a child. My brothers recovered from those terrible years too. Wesley started speaking normally again, becoming a happy, lively boy. Little Alan lost his stutter and stopped wetting the bed, growing into a smart, loving child. When I was 16, I met the man who would become my husband, Earl. Same name as that neighbor from Millerville, remember? Fate works in mysterious ways. He was the son of a neighboring farmer, 20 years old, hard-working, polite, from a good family. But most importantly, he had gentle hands and a soft voice. He never shouted at anyone. We dated for 3 years, always respecting each other, and always under Grandpa Theodore's watchful eye, who had become my real father. When I was 19, we had a small but beautiful wedding on the farm, with fiddle music, square dancing, and country music all night long. In 1970, Earl got a good job in the city, and we moved to Cedar Falls, buying this little house, small but cozy, where I've lived ever since. It has 3 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, the heart of the home, and a backyard with peach trees, apple trees, and a small herb garden that I still tend to today. Earl and I had 4 children, my darlings, 2 boys and 2 girls. Joseph is a bus driver now. Mary works at an elementary school. Frank is a mechanic with his own shop, and little Grace is a teacher at the same school as her sister. Raising those children was the happiest time of my life. For the first time ever, I learned what it means to raise children with love, to discipline with patience, to correct without violence. When they misbehaved, and like all normal children, they did often, I'd sit down and talk to them, explaining why their actions were wrong, giving appropriate educational consequences when necessary, but never laying a hand on them, because I knew firsthand the damage that kind of harm does to a child. My husband Earl was my partner in everything, hardworking, loving, always helping with the children when he came home from work, playing with them in the yard, and insisting we have family dinners together every night. We were married for 52 years, children. He passed away 3 years ago from a heart attack, but we'd lived a full life together, with a love that was true and lasting. Now at 74, my greatest joy is my 4 grandchildren. 12-year-old Johnny, 10-year-old Mary Beth, 8-year-old Luke, and 5-year-old little Anna. They are the light of my life, the reason I wake up excited every morning. Every afternoon when they come home from school, it's the same joyful scene. They burst through the door shouting, "Grandma Celia! Grandma Celia!" and run straight to the kitchen, where there are always warm cookies waiting for them. They sit at this very table doing their homework while I prepare afternoon snacks. Butter cookies, fruit smoothies, cornbread, homemade biscuits. My darlings, how free they are. They run through the house, play in the yard, make messes, laugh loud, sing songs, invent their own games. Sometimes they knock things over, break glasses, make mistakes, and I just laugh along with them, helping clean up, kissing their boo-boos when they get hurt. "It's okay, sweetie. Grandma will clean it up right away." Because I know that happy children are children who get to be children, who can make mistakes without being beaten, cry when they're hurt, and laugh when they're happy. My grandchildren will never know what it's like to be afraid in their own home. Never know what it's like to tiptoe around to avoid angering a grown-up. On weekends, my children come over for Sunday dinner. They always do, because keeping our family close is a tradition I've always insisted on. This house becomes a sea of joy. The big dining table filled with people, laughter and conversation filling the air, grandchildren running from one room to another. And I stand in the middle of it all, serving food, listening to everyone's stories, thanking God for giving me the chance to see love conquer hatred. I still keep in touch with my brothers. Wesley is a successful businessman in Mobile, married with children, living a happy life. Alan is a teacher in Huntsville, with a family of his own too. The three of us talk on the phone every week, and whenever we get the chance, we gather to reminiscence, not about the bad times, but about the good ones that came later. Mama Betty Sue lived to be 85 years old, getting to see all her grandchildren, and even some great-grandchildren. She passed away peacefully surrounded by love, knowing that despite all the hardships, she'd raised good children. She's buried in the Cedar Falls Cemetery, and I visit her every Monday, bringing flowers and telling her all about the family. Life has a funny way of coming full circle, doesn't it, my darlings? The child who almost died at 10 years old is now a 74-year-old grandmother surrounded by love, living in the small town where she chose to rebuild her life. Cedar Falls became my true home, a place where I built my own family and learned what real happiness is. Every morning when I wake up and see the sun shining through the kitchen window, I thank God for this second chance at life. I thank Him for teaching me that love is always stronger than violence, and that a real family is a place of protection and refuge, not harm and destruction. That's my story, my darlings, those of you watching this video today. Because I believe that all pain can be turned into hope, and all suffering can become strength to help others. My dear friends, that's the end of my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but it was worth sharing. I know it's heavy, I know it touches your hearts, because as I relive every detail of this journey, it touches mine deeply too. But I want you to know something very important. I'm not telling my story for sympathy. I'm telling it because over these 74 years, I've learned that our pain can become power, our scars can become wisdom, and our suffering can become hope for those still going through what I endured. If there's any child in this world right now living the life I once lived, tiptoeing around their own home, covering up bruises with long sleeves, making excuses for injuries, believing they deserve the violence being inflicted upon them, I want that child to know. You do not deserve this. You never have. You never will. No matter what they say to you. No matter how many times they repeat this is for your own good, or you asked for it. Don't believe them. No child ever asks for an adult's violence. Children break glasses, make messes, cry, laugh loud, forget to put things away. That's what children do. And when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones hurting you, that's not discipline. That's not love. That's pure cowardice. I learned that when we keep the truth hidden, when we're too afraid to speak up, the monster grows stronger. But when we find the courage to tell someone we trust, a teacher, a neighbor, a family member, the authorities, things begin to change. That's what happened at Grandpa's farm. The truth didn't just set me free, it set my whole family free. And to all of you who are parents, mothers, uncles, aunts, grandparents, teachers, neighbors, please keep your eyes open. A child who is too quiet, too obedient, always afraid, always making excuses for injuries, maybe silently crying out for help. Ask them gently, listen to them patiently, and be the trusted person that traumatized child needs to find the courage to tell the truth. I also want to say to those of you who have been through similar experiences, but are now adults, you may think it's too late, that time has passed, that seeking help or justice no longer matters. But it's never too late to break free from the chains of the past. It's never too late to seek counseling, to talk to someone, to realize that none of this was ever your fault. For a long time, even as an adult, even with my own beautiful family, that hurt 10-year-old girl still lived inside me. I could still hear Daddy's voice calling me ugly, stupid, worthless. It took years of talking to wise people, of praying, of being surrounded by the love of my family, to realize that those words were lies spoken by a broken man, not the truth about who I really am. Today I know that I am a strong woman, a mother who knows how to love, a grandmother who knows how to protect her children. I know I am worthy of respect, and that my life has meaning, and so do all of you who have been through similar pain. Violence may hurt our bodies temporarily, may wound our souls deeply, but it cannot destroy our ability to love and be loved. It cannot take away our dignity or our future. If I could overcome this, so can you. If I could rebuild my life, so can you. In every country, in every community, there are people and organizations willing to help. Learn about the protective resources in your area. Talk to local authorities, community leaders, someone you trust. Human dignity is a universal right, and no matter where you are, you deserve to live free from violence. Always remember, love is stronger than hatred, truth is more powerful than lies, and a caring, united community can overcome any form of cruelty. When we stand together to protect our most vulnerable, we create a better world for everyone. God bless each and every one of you, my darlings. We'll talk again soon.